Welcome to Synthesize This. In this episode, we're going to be synthesizing a pad sound on the Dave Smith Instruments Pro 2. Let's get started. So as always, the first thing we want to do is initialize a basic patch by going to global, scrolling down to 34 and hitting right now. So first, some theory on pad sounds. So we want something which could be the backbone of a song or help things gel together or accentuate an existing sound. So you can have a pad sound that lives on its own and you can play as a solo. And those typically tend to have more evolving and moving parts and be more elaborate. But those kinds of pad sounds don't normally gel with a full song. So in this video, I'm going to focus more on the subtle, simple pads. So to make a pad sound interesting, typically you want to detune one or more oscillators together. In this case, we have 4 oscillators, but keep in mind that this synth is paraphonic. So if I want to be able to play chords with the pad, which you typically want to do with pads, in this case, I have to sacrifice these 4 oscillators to be the 4 different notes in my chord. So effectively, I will have a single oscillator synth, 1 per voice. And as such, I can't rely on detuning 2 oscillators. So we're going to have to use different techniques to make the sound interesting and evolving. So to begin with, let's start and turn the synth into paraphonic mode by going to miscellaneous parameters, switching key assign to paraphonic. I only have 1 oscillator enabled in this case, so I won't be able to play 4 notes. So let's enable all of them together. A neat trick with the Pro 2, if you want to control multiple parameters at once, is to hold down, and now you're in this kind of locked modification mode. You can do the same thing with the LFOs. So I'm going to change the shape. Let's start off with triangle for now. We'll tweak it later. And we're going to higher the amount so they're all audible. So now I can play 4-note chords. One of the key differentiation to make something sound like a pad versus a lead or another type of sound is to have a very slow attack and a slow release. So I'm going to change the amp envelope off the gate to mimic that sound. Set a relatively high attack, low decay, high sustain, and high release. Let's tweak that. So this is a perfectly suitable, simple pad sound. Single oscillator, no effects, no modulation, just a nice slow evolving attack and release. And honestly, this could serve perfectly well depending on the song, especially a song which has lots of moving parts already that you don't want to interfere with. But for the purpose of this demo, let's try to make it a little more interesting. One way to do that is to play around and pick some different wavetables. Let's get LFO1 to modulate the wave shape of all 4 oscillators. So I'm going to pick shape mod all oscillators and turn up the amount. I'm going to lower the frequency. I find with pad sounds it's better to have slow modulation that evolves over time. So you don't notice it right away, but as you hold down the chord, you start to hear morphing going on, which keeps the sound interesting. Next thing I'm going to do is engage the filter here. Let's start with the low pass filter. I'm going to modulate that with the filter's dedicated envelope here. And we're going to replicate a similar pattern as I did with the amp envelope. High attack, low decay, high sustain, and high release. And tweak the parameters till it sounds good. Gonna modulate the pitch, all 4 oscillators with envelope 4 here. I'll set it to frequency for all oscillators. I'll set a high amount for now just so I can tweak the sound. Obviously that's too much, so we're gonna lower it all the way down to make it really subtle. So it's a little more interesting because the pitch kind of wobbles and then it steady states. I'm going to increase the oscillator slop on some of the oscillator to add a little more movement. Another way to enrich your pad sounds is to add effects. In this case, we have 4 delays that I'm going to gauge. I'm just going to set them all to fairly low standard values. Gonna make the mod wheel modulate the filter cutoff. I'm also gonna add mod wheel modulation for distortion as well. I'm going to set LFO to modulate the filter cutoff as well. Let's play around with different wavetable shapes. Let's see if we can play some of the character section. I like the way the decimator sounds, so I'm going to assign that to the first slider here. It's a little too extreme. Another interesting thing to do is to modulate the shape mod of only one of the oscillators. And it's interesting because in this case, where I'm playing, you can think of each note as being one of the 4 oscillators. So when I play a chord, only one of the notes in the chord will have the modulation, which ends up in somewhat of a interesting effect. see what the high pass filter sounds like for this. Let's make the second auxiliary envelope modulate the shape mod as well.